Hello. So yes, my name is Mike Rose. I'm at tinyBuild, a publisher. If you know me, you possibly know me from stuff I was doing before. I wrote about video games forever, too long, so like Gamma and places like that. So normally I would do talks on like marketing and YouTube and stuff like that. But today I'm trying something a little bit different, which is going to be sort of a designy style talk. It's actually going to be a lot kind of like the articles I used to write for Gamma, in that I've talked to a bunch of different developers and got lots of feedback from them, opinions and things. So I guess if you kind of think of it like an article I used to write, then that will make a little bit more sense. Yeah, I should move to the title slide. So I'm going to be talking about bluffing, and specifically in video games, but also in tabletop games. So I don't know how many of you sort of play card and board games. But I have been playing tons of them recently, and I just find so many of them so interesting. I'm playing a lot of these kind of card and tabletop games has made me really start to realize how a lot of the elements that you find in these games, or the kind of bluffing and misdirection elements, you don't actually often see in video games, which kind of got me wondering, well, why is that? Are there kind of designs that we're missing out on that we could be focusing more on? So that's basically a lot of what I'm going to be talking about. And I'm going to be harking back to a lot of tabletop games in comparison. So as part of that, I tried to invent some kind of really quick game, which you'll have possibly have received a card for as you came in. If you didn't, then I'm sorry about that. But the idea is that every single person in the room, actually I'll go to the rules first. So every single person in the room has a card, hopefully, and you'll either be on the red or blue team, and your card is also going to say a mission on it. So if you manage to complete the mission, you're getting a point for your team, and if you don't, then you're not. But of course, other people on the other team will also perhaps want to be stopping you from earning your point as well. So again, I was trying to invent a kind of game that would work in the space of about 20 seconds from someone coming in and sitting down, which was pretty difficult. You can see a lot of the roles here are roles that you're going to have found on your cards. So, for example, I don't know, could you maybe put your hand up if you had the slink away card? Okay, so these people had to sit on an aisle seat, and it seems like most people managed that. So yeah, congratulations there. And then one of the quite interesting ones was the bomb. So if you have the bomb when the talk starts, then you lose. But if someone asks to look at the bomb, then you get to swap cards with them. So is there anybody who was the bomb? And did you manage to swap? No. Some people. Oh, you managed to swap it. Amazing. So yeah, basically the idea was to try and show you, in a lot of the different cards here, there was a lot of ways that you could essentially try and bluff your way to a win, right? So for example, if you were the bomber, then you could try and get someone to look at your card. Something like the sneak, you're not allowed anybody to actually look at your card, but you have to also look at someone else's card, so you have to try and come up with some ridiculous reason why you need to see theirs, but they can't see yours. So, I mean, just a quick show of hands. So if you were on the red team and you managed to complete your mission, can you just put your hand up? All right. Okay, and then if you're on the blue team and you managed to complete it. Okay, that's a blue win there. Excellent, cool. Right, so this will hopefully segue into what I'm about to talk about. Like I mentioned, a lot of the stuff I talked about is from talking to people who are making these kind of games. So Chris Ecker, who you most likely know, he's currently working on a game called SpyParty, which is going to feature quite a lot in this. Ron Carmel, he originally was a 2D boy. He made World of Goo, and he's currently making a quite interesting game that I'm going to, again, mention later. And Paul Kidduff Taylor, he's with Mode 7, and he made Frozen Synapse, and he's making Frozen Cortex at the moment. Again, all of these people I'm going to be mentioning later because their games tend to move into what I'm going to talk to. So quite simply, I want to start talking about what exactly bluffing is. So it's actually pretty interesting, like, looking into the differences between, bluffing and lying and just bullshitting people. Because when you're bluffing, it's not that you're just lying, it's actually that you are role-playing some kind of falseness or falsehood. So a lot of the time, you'll you'll be given some information that you have to kind of lie about, bluff your way out of, or it is such that you build up some information on your own. So, for example, you know, in poker, the hand that you have. The thing with bluffing is that the majority of the time there always needs to be some kind of information that you have that other people can challenge. That's kind of the key of bluffing. And if there isn't, then it's not really bluffing. But of course, for the other person who is challenging you, there also needs to be a risk that they might be wrong. And if they are wrong, then it's going to be kind of costly for them. And that's just a picture of bluff in New Zealand, because why not? What makes bluffing fun? So the thing that makes bluffing fun, and it's really obvious if you play tabletop games, is the interactions that it creates. It creates very tense interactions. It creates a lot of interactions that you wouldn't normally do in real life. There's a lot of card games now that will, you know, kind of, a lot of ones centered around spies and werewolves and things like that, where you maybe see them in like a movie or something like that, but you'd never actually be in a situation where you have to lie about being something in real life. So it can be really exciting to do those kind of things. And the invitation on your part to challenge someone to bluff you is what is driving the bluff. Because if you're just bluffing about something and there's not actually people all the time going, oh, is he, isn't he? Then it kind of slows it down a little bit. So yeah, it's really key that you have that kind of challenge in place. So it seems like the #1 reason why there isn't more bluffing in video games is simply because so many video games are single player, and you can't really bluff in single player. I mean, you maybe can, as I'm going to explore a little bit later, but for the most part, it's very much a multiplayer situation. And even a lot of the time, especially with bigger games, when there is a multiplayer part of a game, it will be sort of based on the single player, right? Of course, it's just very niche, the idea of bluffing to people, as we've seen, because there's not many games that do it. And as well, just in kind of digital form, when you're playing maybe online, it's very difficult to actually convey the politics of bluffing. You kind of need to be looking in someone's eyes, etc., to be able to really pull off the bluff sometimes. So then it got me wondering, well, is this just a dead end? And I started talking to people who were trying to put some of these things in their games. And this is a quote from Chris Ecker. Essentially, the too long didn't read version is that as he's been designing SpyParty, he's just been finding that there's just these giant bits of game design that no one seems to have covered yet that are just waiting for people to mess around with them and to fiddle around with them and kind of jam on ideas. So it seems like, and it wasn't just Chris as well, as other people I talked to who are making these kind of games were saying the same thing. It seems like people could be making games based around this idea. And it seems, especially now as well, now that, you know, we've got a lot, everybody, well, not everybody, but majority of people now are always online, and it seems like now we have the tech in place that can really support these kind of games. So I've tried to essentially look over the differences between how tabletop games do it and how video games do it, because tabletop games, just so many of them do it, and they seem to do it so well. So it seems like they break down into sort of 3 different types of bluff in tabletop games. So there'll be hidden roles games, where you're essentially convincing someone else that you are a certain thing, maybe to their detriment. There's misdirection, where you are showing someone some information. You're kind of slipping them a little bit of information in the hope that they will guess that you are going to go wrong somewhere else on the next turn. And then there's just the poker face, which is essentially pretending that you are confident enough and showing, yes, I'm going to pretend that I definitely have this, in the hope that then they will back down. Or maybe pretending, you know, I actually have something terrible, maybe you should step up and try and take me on. So I just want to move through some quick examples. I'm sure loads of you have played a lot of these, but just in case you haven't. So Resistance is kind of one of the quintessential hidden role games. It's all about, you know, you're in a group of friends and a couple of the people around the table are spies, but no one knows. And you're trying to complete missions, but every now and again a mission is failing because one of the spies is involved. And it's not actually the goal of the game to find the spies, but if you don't find them, then you're going to lose, probably. So yeah, this is kind of like the base hidden roles game the way I see it in tabletop. Werewolf, there's loads of different types of werewolf games. This one in particular is Ultimate One Night Werewolf. This one goes a little deeper down the rabbit hole in that each person isn't just good or bad. They can also be different roles as well that do different things. So it becomes a lot more, the politics of this game are crazy because people the second that the game starts, no one wants to talk because everybody's trying to decide, well, if I talk first, but what if that person did that and that person's that? So this can be really exciting as well. And then when you get very, very far down the rabbit hole, when you kind of try to take these hidden role ideas and put them into a larger game, as maybe video games try and do, you get something like Battlestar Galactica, where one or two people around the table are bad guys, and they are slowly but surely messing up the entire game for everybody else and just failing things on purpose. And then even when they then get found out, they can then continue to be bastards just all the way through the game, which is absolutely hilarious. So yeah, it's kind of the progression from Resistance, where it's pretty light, but it's the very core of the game, to Battlestar Galactica, where it's a smaller part of the game, but in terms of compared to video games, it's still pretty heavy. So then you've got like Misdirection. So you've got things like in Dead of Winter, where there doesn't have to be a bad guy in Dead of Winter, but everybody has their own specific goals as well. So someone might, for example, it's kind of like a zombie survival game, and someone might say that they need food, and they have to take the last remains of the food when they actually don't. It's just that they needed to complete their own personal objective. Netrunner is obviously pretty popular at the moment, and there's a lot of misdirection stuff in there where you're essentially playing stuff to try and pretend to the other person that you are going to go down a certain strategy and actually you're following another one. Sheriff of Nottingham is a pretty interesting game where you kind of have cards in bags and someone around the table is the sheriff, and you hold your bag to them and you kind of challenge them. You say, I have this in the bag. And they have to take the bag off you and then decide whether they're just going to give it you back, they sort of believe you, or they're going to open the bag and see if you actually did. If you were telling the truth, then that's bad for them if they open it, and if you lie, then they manage to catch you. It's pretty satisfying to try and work out whether the people around the room, especially as each turn goes on, trying to decide, well, he's lied a few times, so he's probably going to do it again this time. A game called Skull, which is very kind of stripped down poker face style, where you're essentially, each person has 4 cards, 3 of them have flowers on them, 1 has a skull on it, and you put them face down and then try to guess how many you can pick up, including everybody else's, before you find a skull, or without finding a skull. So again, it's very much about trying to kind of look into people's eyes and try and decide whether or not, and using the bets that they make as well. If they say, I can pick up 4 of them, then you can think, well, he wouldn't have said that if he didn't have flowers, so I can bet 5. And Spyfall is one that's just come out recently, which really kind of takes it to the extreme. So everybody around a table is given a location, and they're all in the same location, and everybody around the table knows where we are, except one person who has a spy card, and they don't know where we are. And then each person around the table essentially asks each other questions to try and pull out the spy, try and find them, because they have no idea. So pretend we're in a submarine, then someone might ask somebody else, do you feel like we're under a lot of pressure? And if everybody around the table sort of smirks and seems to get the joke, but then one person doesn't, then there's a chance they might be the spy. So you might ask them a really loaded question about a submarine and see if they can get it. So that kind of really takes it to the extreme. And you can see now, like with this kind of game especially, you can kind of see where there's still kind of game design that needs to be explored. So yeah, I mean, I've played so many tabletop games, and even in some of the simplest ones, bluffing is very common as a design element. And some games, as we just saw there, like some of them are just based entirely around bluffing. All it needs is just a little bit of secret information that someone can have, and you can make a game incredibly tense from what it was before. So when I'm looking at video games, it's a lot more difficult. There's So blending seems to be a very specific way that video game developers try to do bluffing, sort of in ways that you try and trick other people into thinking that you're part of the game. I also like to call it act like an AI. So I'll show some examples in a second. And then misdirection is kind of the other very vague way that video games try to do bluffing. So SpyParty is pretty interesting in the way it does blending. So in case you're not aware of this game, it's a game for two people. One person is a spy at a party, and the other person is a sniper looking in on the party. And the spy is given a set of instructions that they have to follow, a set of missions. And essentially, they have to try and act. Everybody else in the room is just an AI character. And so while they're trying to complete their missions, they also have to try and act as AI as possible so that the sniper isn't going to realize that they're not just part of the machine. So it's kind of fascinating, this whole bluff by pretending to be something else style thing. Another one is Hidden in Plain Sight. This was like an Xbox Live indie game years and years ago. It's on PC as well. This is the same kind of concept. So I think you can have up to 4 players in this. And there's multiple different modes. But in this mode, for example, again, everybody that you can see on the screen there is an AI, except 4 people who are players. And they are trying to touch the 5 statues around. But every time they touch a statue, there'll be a sort of bong noise. So all the other players will know that if there's anybody near a statue right now, they might be a player. And you can go to another player and stab them and kill them while you're playing. Or you can just try and carry on with your mission. So it's this balance of you're trying to complete your mission, but you're also really trying to work out who everybody else and make sure that they haven't touched more statues than you. And then as well, just in like bigger games, you see things like Assassin's Creed. I mean, specifically the multiplayer. There's a mode where you're trying to hunt down someone that you're trying to kill. And they're trying to act like an AI. Maybe they're just sat on a bench, or the sorts of things that you do in Assassin's Creed. They kind of did it in Watch Dogs as well, with the whole, you're trying to track down another player online, and then you're trying to be really inconspicuous while you rob them blind from your mobile phone near them. But yeah, you can kind of see this blending into the background style thing happening in quite a few games. The other main way, like I said, is misdirection. So there's a bunch of different ways that games do misdirection. In strategy games, for example, there's a lot of things where you do illusions. So for example, in this shot you can see here, this is like a classic StarCraft game, Idra versus Hook, where one of the players used essentially a set of illusions to make the other player think that he had a way bigger armor than he actually did. And the other guy just quit the game. This was in the middle of like an official match that was being streamed, and he just quit the game because he decided he lost already. Even if he just waited 3 more seconds, he would have started shooting these illusions and realized that they weren't actually real. And then Halo did a kind of similar illusion style thing where you could set off a sort of illusion of yourself that would kind of run straight forward. So you could purposely set one off to run around a corner. And then as the person was focusing on that illusion, then you could pop out and shoot them. So you can see it's kind of vague, and you might even argue that it's maybe bluffing, maybe not. But yeah, it's definitely not in the same kind of league as what tabletop games are doing. Even just things like faking moves. So if you play Counter-Strike, you'll know that a pretty decent strategy is to pretend that you're going to one bomb site and actually the rest of your team is going to another one. There's a game, so I mentioned earlier, Frozen Synapse, which is it's a bit like top-down, turn-based Counter-Strike, where the other player can only see you if they're in your line of sight. So you can essentially, kind of pop one person out and make them think, okay, so he's going that way, so on my next turn I'll do this. And then you do something entirely different, but then maybe they'll double bluff you and go that way as well. So again, it's kind of prevalent when it comes to faking moves and things, but it's not really a hardcore. You could play both of these games and never bluff once and continue to enjoy them. And of course, fighting games. I'd be silly if I didn't mention fighting games. There's a lot of this kind of misdirection, especially when you really get into the game. Cancelling moves and things like that can really work well against the more pro players. There are some games that do hidden roles, like the kind of tabletop games, but they're few and far between. I really couldn't think of even half a dozen of them. And even the ones that do, I mean, seemed to not go down so well. So the one on the left is the ship, which came out a while ago, where each person on a ship needs to kill somebody else. And you can't, basically, if you kill the person that is not your target, then that's bad for you. You'll lose points. So you have to specifically kill that person. But they can kill you back. And it was a little bit of a mess. I remember loving the idea, but it didn't work so well. And they made kind of a semi-sequel to it, Bloody Good Time, where they essentially heavily toned down that element of it and made it a first-person shooter. So you can kind of see where that went for them. The other one is a game called Devil's Bluff, which is in beta at the moment, which seems promising. It's you're all kind of in a castle together, and one person is the devil, and you've all got missions. And you're trying to complete the missions, but then at any time the devil can just decide to just slaughter someone. So that's really interesting in, kind of the devil, like, bluffing someone. Oh, our mission's this way. Come this way, I know where it is, and then picking them off when they're by themselves. Okay, I just showed a bunch of games, so I'm going to actually try to explain what I'm saying. So the thing with all the video games that I just showed you, like I mentioned, is that there are elements of bluffing, but I can't think of many games where they actually, like, bring tension about, right? Like, a lot of the tension, for example, if you're playing Counter-Strike, a lot of the tension comes from a lot of the other elements of the game. The bluffing stuff is just the setup, really. I think one problem is that in a lot of games, you don't really have hidden information, and the hidden information you do doesn't really matter. So, like, how much ammo you have, or what guns you have, or something like that, isn't really enough to try and bluff someone else. So a lot of the time, the bluffing that we find in video games is just a tiny, tiny part of the game and really isn't noticeable at all. And actually, like I said, you can just go and play an entire game, and then when you're talking to someone later, they might half mention, oh, did you try this bluffing stuff? And you'd say, no, I really did not even realize it was in the game. It seems like the main problem is that there just aren't the social cues that you can get in tabletop games. So, like I say, actually being able to, like, see people's faces and their body move, the kind of way they're moving and how they're moving their hands, etc. That's really important for these kind of games, and we just don't have that in video games. So because of that, just it all breaks down one by one. All the behaviors that you're kind of exhibiting become meaningless, and all the little movements you're having, people just don't have the context for them. Essentially, it doesn't seem like there can be the excitement in a lot of the bluffing that is in video games right now that is actually prevalent in tabletop games. And of course, as well, you kind of need to have a game which not only works online, but also is incredibly popular. Otherwise, as we've seen, kind of the curse of the indie multiplayer game, it just kind of doesn't work because nobody actually buys the game or joins the game to play it. So through talking to people and seeing games that I think are doing it quite well, it seems like the rules that you kind of need to keep in mind if you're going to try and kind of explore this kind of thing in a game you're making is that the rules of it need to not meander and change so that someone gets kind of pissed off that, like, halfway through the game, a cool setup that they were making all of a sudden doesn't make any sense because something changed along the way. You need to be able to just grasp it really quickly so that people can just get straight into it. There needs to be more kind of interesting decisions and kind of commitments that people need to make. They need to commit to interesting things that then they need to continue on the bluff. And if they kind of stop with the bluff or they get caught, then it doesn't matter. That can't happen. It needs to, for that kind of tense atmosphere to be there, the bluff needs to continue onwards. And like with a lot of tabletop games, there needs to be more of a focus on player interaction. So I'll show you a game in a second which I think does it pretty well. And as well, cutting out non-randomness. Randomness just doesn't seem to work very well in these kind of games. In terms of, there needs to be a set rules, and then everybody needs to understand them, and there needs to be never any confusion about what it is that everybody's doing. There needs to be fixed on exactly how they're going to pull off this bluff. So ones that I feel like are doing it pretty well at the moment. Subterfuge is a new game from Ron Carmel. And the interesting thing is, when I talked to him about this, he said he never purposely made it a bluffing game originally. It just kind of came off like that. So it's a strategy game where you're moving subs around, and about 8 different people play at the same time, and you play it over a week on your mobile phone. So subs take like sort of 10 hours to move between different stations. But about 75% of the game is spent in a text box, sending messages to other players. The vast portion of the game, when I've played like a few times now, and every single time I've played, even before you start moving submarines, you start messaging the people. You look around who's around you, and you go, right, so if I can pretend to that person that I'm going to be on their team, but actually be helping out that person, I can get rid of them, and then they'll be too weak, and then I can take them out. And then you start getting caught because then someone messages you saying, hey, they said this thing to me, and see, you said you were on my team, and it kind of works incredibly well. If you want to check this game out, I think you can sign up for the beta right now. But it's this kind of, like I was saying, the opening as many channels of communication and focusing on interaction seems to work really well for these bluffing strategies. And then SpyParty, I'll just kind of try to play it. There we go. So SpyParty, like I was mentioning, is really interesting in that there are really specific things you can do in this game as well. So as the sniper, you can actually, the spy can see where you're aiming. So you can really rattle them by pretending you know who they are and just aiming at people's heads and just hovering it over their head for 20 seconds. And if it's not them, then you just move on and you aim at someone else's head as well. But there's a bunch of different ways you can bluff in this game. As the spy, which is really interesting, you can just not press anything when the game starts, and you will continue on as an AI. So you get 3 minutes, but you can just for 1.5 minutes not press anything, and you will literally be an AI. You're not just pretending to be one, you are still one. So there's ways that you can really kind of focus on messing with the other player. And one of our games as well, Boyd, so this is kind of real-time strategy-like. Because the levels are so small and because the action's so fast, it's kind of like a broken-down strategy game in 5 minutes. Then you see a lot of people, winning really quickly by pretending, like kind of faking they're going to go one way and then rushing the other, building up an army in the kind of cloud of mist and then rushing the army. So that seems to really work for this game. And just really quickly, I know I'm running out of time. The single player stuff, like can you actually do bluffing in single player? I think like Assassin's Creed, I don't know if you'd argue if it works or not, the whole kind of hiding from an AI who you're following. I find those kind of missions incredibly irritating, and I don't really see them as bluffing. But you can kind of slightly argue that it's working there. With SpyParty, he's trying to do single player at the moment, and he's finding it incredibly difficult. He's essentially building AI, which act more like a player than all of the other AI in the game, which sounds mind-boggling. And then trying to make different difficulties, like clever humans and things like that. So I don't know if that works, but it's really interesting to watch someone who's trying to make it. Right, I'll do a really quick wrap-up. So it seems like if you're going to try and put bluffing into a game, you want there to be private information that can be challenged. It needs to have lots of interactions between players, and they need to be tense and exciting. It seems like it's really difficult to pull off true bluffing in video games because you're kind of missing all the social cues of tabletop games. But then again, the people who are doing it have sort of said that there seems like there's a lot of space to still explore. So if you are interested in this kind of thing, it might be a really good idea to do so. And if there was anybody who had the spy card in the room and they managed to not show anybody by the end of the talk, then congratulations, you've just won the game. So well done. Right, thank you very much.